Okay, finally getting after this narration for the 8 pieces of brocade. And now we're on. 2 hands hold the feet to strengthen kidneys and waist. And just in case you forgot, I'm not a medical professional and cannot give advice for any medical condition. I'm just a hobbyist interested in various topics, and I provide references for how I come to these conclusions. So I'm going to cover 2 ways I've seen this perform. Here we go with the first one, starting from a outstretched position, reaching down, hands rubbing against the back, down the back of the legs, and then grabbing the feet, and then looking up, and then gently, or maybe not gently, pulling up as if you're trying to raise back up, but holding on to your feet firmly. Then the hands raise above the head and tilting at the pelvis, rising all the way back to an upright standing position, hands over the head, stretching upwards. Okay, here we'll show it a second time, and then pause right here, and then we'll look at the muscles involved in this exercise. So we see here the muscles involved are very similar to that of a straight-legged deadlift or some exercise like that activates the entire posterior chain. So we have all the way from the skull to the heel, all the muscles involved being that the trapezius, the latissimus dorsi, the thoracolumbar fascia, the gluteus maximus, the hamstrings or biceps femoris, the gastrocnemius and the soleus are actually here in a stretched position, and the tibialis anterior will be contracted as the foot is dorsiflex and the toes are being pulled upwards. And then we have probably some activation in the rear deltoids, more of a stabilized activity going on there probably. Here I've drawn out the kind of force lines involved, and we see here we have the red line represents the muscles that are contracting and kind of the direction in which they are pulling, and then the blue lines would be the ones that are stretched in the direction in which they're being stretched. So you see here the trapezius is contracting and pulling down away from the skull and towards the hip, actually the trapezius will go towards the middle of the spine. We'll have the glutes pulling away from the hip, pulling down towards the femur or into the IT band strongly. The hamstrings will be contracting away from the pelvis, pulling downward, and then we'll have at the front of the leg, the anterior, the tibialis anterior, pulling the foot up towards the knee, and as a result, the muscles in the calf, the gastrocnemius and soleus, will be passively being pulled downward towards the heel. So as we turn back to a standing position, the arms reach out above the head, and we start to rise back up. Now we got here a diagram showing the hat, which is the head, arms, and torso, as a weight, and gravity pulling it downwards, and we'll see that is why the muscles in red, or the red arrows are showing the direction of pull by those muscles are pulling in that direction. So they're keeping the head, arms, and torso upright, working against gravity. So they're pulling down and back to raise the body upwards, and we'll see that the tibialis has to pull up to drive the heel down to help prevent the body from tipping over. And here's another quick view of the muscles involved, looking from the top down. We see the trapezius, deltoids, the erector spinae, and the gluteus maximus. When we reach the end position, we see here the back of the body is pulling in one direction, and the front of the body is being pulled in the opposite direction. Here's a view from the rear. showing a couple other muscles, the adductor magnus, and possibly some contribution from the QL or quadratus lumborum muscle, which pulls the rib cage towards the hip. I would think this is kind of acting in more of a stabilizing manner than pulling the body up, as which would be most of the work I'd imagine could come from the glutes, hamstrings, and the erector spine muscles. There's another variation to perform this exercise, and in this one the practitioner rolls up the spine instead of keeping the upper body or the upper torso straight and tilting via the contraction of the glutes. Here the practitioner raises each vertebrae slowly until reaching the upright position, very similar to a roll up, roll down kind of activity done in Pilates. We see here this probably would work the erector spine muscles more thoroughly. If we look at the erector spine muscles, there's many different attachment points from the pelvis to the lower ribs, middle of the rib cage, top of the rib cage, back of the skull. So as each vertebrae gets rolled up, it will place more emphasis on certain attachments of the erector spine. And here's the exercise one more time from the front view. If we use the anatomy trains as a reference, we have the back line shown here, and we see pretty much the entire back line is involved and is kind of the primary emphasis that this exercise places. One other little interesting thing to note, if you look at the tension lines or lines of force that I drew, you see this down the back and up the front. Looks somewhat similar to the macrocosmic orbit. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Just kind of interesting observation. Alright, and here's the references I use for this video and many of the others. And if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, share it up, and check me out also on Instagram or YouTube.